Hey, there we go. We have some audio now. Sorry about that. I'm Rev Dave Thompson, and I'm really happy to welcome you back to our Civil Human Bible study today. I'm a civil human minister, and so what that means is that I focus my ministry on building human peace and common ground. And in that effort, I'm looking at these scriptures to try to find those truths and teachings that I feel are applicable across the board to all humans. And I want to do that in a civil manner, to respect the basic shared human needs that we all have. You know, the need to believe what we want to about the unanswered questions in our faith, the need to be free of control of others, the need to vote for those who will have control over us, the need to intimately love, and the need to live and to let live. I want to thank you so much for coming back to this Bible study. All of your participation has been amazing and really encouraging, not only for me, but for others. And I'm very grateful for that. So let's go ahead and dive into the text. Today we are in Matthew chapter 18, verses 7 through 9. Starting with verse 7. Woe to the world because of offenses. For offenses must come, but woe to the man by whom the offenses come. And if your hand or foot causes you to sin, cut it off and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life lame or maimed, rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet to be cast into the everlasting fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out and cast it from you. It is better for you to enter into life with 1 eye, rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into the fire. And then I have some comments from my dad, who wrote in this Bible and gave it to me as a present from high school. Let's see if I can read it. Whatever causes you to sin, get rid of it, cast it from you. These are good words. Appreciate my dad doing that. To give me a gift of scripture is really, truly valuable and something that I'm really grateful for. So what's going on here? I want to paint a picture of what's actually happening right now for the disciples here, who Jesus is talking to. This is the account that Matthew, one of his early disciples, gave us and wrote out in about the 1st century, probably 70 AD, which is like 50 years after the death of Jesus. And we have just talked about who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, right? Yesterday, the disciples were wondering who's going to be the best, who's going to be top dog in this new society that you're building, Jesus. And Jesus says, hey, bring this child in, sits him down and says, do you see this child? This is the way that you need to become. You need to become someone who learns and is humble, meaning starting over again and being able to embrace these virtues that Jesus is talking about. So by saying, when he talks about being great, he's essentially saying you need to become the least in order to do that, in order to become great. And that's kind of an inversion flip. And then at the end of that passage yesterday, you may remember that he says, whoever causes this little child to stumble or ensnares them in a trap, they should tie a millstone around their neck, which is like a big rock, and throw themselves into the sea and drown, which is obviously a pretty graphic, but his emphasis was that this is probably one of the worst things that you can do as a person, is to take somebody who's trying to fix their life and to introduce them back into, or make it difficult for them to become better by causing them to do something that they shouldn't. Today, Jesus is going to talk a little bit more about what that means to stumbling and what causes us to stumble, and then how to not stumble. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Let's go ahead and start talking through the verses themselves. He begins by saying, woe. And as I reading it, woe to the world because of offenses. This word woe is really an expression of grief. Not like, whoa, stop, but woe are you. It's this idea of denunciation, of saying this is something far from who I want to be and what I want to live and the character by which I want to employ myself during the day. And he says, woe to the world because the traps are going to be there. And he actually says in the world here is cosmos. Carl Sagan, you may recall, wrote a book back in the day, Cosmos, and it's the same word here. I loved that book. I'm a bit of a geek, I realize. Like in 5th grade, I fell in love with that book. Anywho, the reality here is that Jesus is talking about everybody, not just the Jewish people, not just his disciples, but the entire world, and yes, by extension, the entire universe. And so what he is saying here is that we're going to have these necessarily, that offenses and things that are going to make us stumble and ensnare us are going to be part of every day, that we should be prepared for it, that we should know that it's not unusual, that when we face these snares and when we face these times where we're questioning our values or what we want to do or how we want to be, these are normal and going to be necessary. And then he says, but woe, again, this word of denunciation and grief, to those through which these stumbling blocks come. I don't think I have to point out, some of the obvious ones in our society where it's clear people are pushing addiction and whatever form that comes, whether it comes through substance or whether it becomes through sexuality or whether it comes from some other expression. It's this idea of bringing somebody back into something that is causing them difficulty, that makes them stumble. And this word stumble in the Greek, it means to trap or ensnare. It's actually the mechanism on a trap that it's talking about. So this is the thing that actually causes them to be ensnared, to stumble, and to not progress as far as they want to. These are going to be a constant pressure, like I was just mentioning. And so what does Jesus say about it? How does he say that we should approach these things? He gives us quite a graphic example. Cut your hand off, cut your feet off, gouge out your eyes. And it's better for you to not have those and to maybe suffer in life in that small function than for you to be thrown into the fires or to be destroyed by the fires. I want to talk about that fire thing in a little bit because it's often used to sort of thump people. Why don't we jump into it now? It's often used to browbeat people. This notion of, turn or burn. If you don't do everything perfect, God's going to throw you in a lake of fire that you are going to suffer and burn forever and ever and ever and ever. That's one way to look at it. There's another way to look at it, which I believe is a little bit more in keeping with the language here and actually being very conservative, not in a political sense, but in a literary sense. These words can be interpreted, and I feel should be interpreted for what they mean. So when he's talking about these fires that are going to be thrown into, this word there are two words that is used. One is for an eternal fire, a fire that doesn't stop, and the other is for an eternal fire of Gehenna. And as we have talked about previously, Gehenna is this area that is south of Jerusalem, that is the place where they put all their garbage, where they put their refuse, things that are contaminated. And there's always a fire burning there because that's how most of the people in the ancient world took care of disease and garbage. You would just burn it in the fire and it would consume it. And of course, there would be plenty of worms and birds picking at it. So it's the picture of a huge garbage with a fire. And that's important to understanding what Jesus is saying here. The word for eternal is also a peculiar word. It doesn't mean forever and ever like we often make it sound. It doesn't even mean a sense of time as in never ending or infinite loops. It is the word for age or length of time. Really, this word could be used to describe our lives, meaning that if we don't cut these things off, we are going to be placing ourselves in a torturous and a destroying situation in life, which is only going to wreak havoc in our lives and for how we want to be. And the other way is, of course, on the other age or completion of a time span, as this word implies. And that would be after we die, that maybe we are basically, we die. We are completely destroyed, as opposed to being alive eternally and somehow being propagated into whether a new body or some existence. Who knows, right? It's not ever really declared how that's going to happen, but it's this idea that we will continue to go on living in a good way and enjoying the benefits of relationship with people that we know and love, and that others who have lived lives of deception and corruption, that these people will in fact be destroyed, meaning they're not going to keep living. I wanted to just give those thoughts because I know we often hear the word hell, and it's always about driving fear into people's hearts so that they don't do something. And as somebody who knows full well what that's all about, I am one of those people who do not do well when I'm motivated by fear, because all it does in me is to produce a desire to do it. It's just the way I'm wired. I know a lot of us are. So the way that this is being talked about is not be better, cut your arms off if they're causing you to stumble, and so that you don't burn forever. It is get rid of what is ensnaring you. Take it and throw it away. If it is causing you to stumble or to be less than who you are, because if you don't, you are going to destroy yourself and your life and the time that you have here on earth. I want to talk a little bit about that. The torture that's involved in not removing the things that we should cast off, really, because they're making us stumble. There are a number of us who have had to deal with addiction in our life. The definition of dysfunction I once heard described as this: a behavior that we cannot stop, that is producing an outcome that is destructive or negative in our life. I've had those, and I continue to deal with those in my life. I'm a human being, and I always will be. And thankfully, I'm getting better at making those things not happen in my life by being and following these virtues. But for those of us who have been through those challenges, who have these things that cause us to stumble or to be ensnared, we need to get rid of those things. If that's somebody who's a relationship in your life that is enjoying or participating in the things that you don't want to participate in, it may mean that you have to get rid of that relationship in your life and to find a new one that will encourage this new behavior. Sometimes we have to take drastic measures to do what we can to make ourselves more, to make ourselves better, to become a better person, to be compassionate, to have mercy, to be humble. The other thing that I want to talk about are a little bit about the steps of the virtues that Jesus talks about. We often look at the things that make us stumble as the obvious ones: drugs, alcohol, pornography, and other vices that are readily apparent and can be viewed as being obviously destructive to a person in excess. But there are many other things that cause us to stumble. And these are oftentimes overlooked and oftentimes are the most destructive to us and to those around us. Arrogance. Arrogance is destructive. It ruins our relationships because it makes people feel like they are less than us. Humility causes other people to feel like they are equal or even better than us, that they have a unique contribution. And that makes people feel better and makes a happy relationship. Sometimes things like compassion, not having compassion for somebody, can actually be a stumbling block. We have an anger for somebody, a relationship that has fallen apart, a relationship that has been hurt. Sometimes we have to do everything that we can to cut out our own anger and frustration, to forgive somebody and to understand and have compassion for their position and where they're coming from. I know I've had to do that actually recently in a relationship that has fallen away from me, and what I thought was for good reason and good purpose. But I know that I've had to work at getting that relationship back and working through it because I want this person in my life. I want to just encourage you with this. We must focus our time in prayer, in meditation, in whatever way that we can, to be a part of helping other people become better. If we know somebody who's dealing with an issue, whether that's addiction or whether that's a relationship or work issues, we need to spend the time to understand what they're going through and help them to remove the things that are causing them to stumble. When you're in the midst of it as a person who is stumbling, it often can be overwhelming and we can't really figure out how to get ourselves free of it. So when we step in to help people, that can make a world of difference. A difference between somebody who will never be free from a trap and the difference between somebody who becomes not only someone who overcomes that trap, but also helps others to do that. I'd love to have you write in the comments situations that you've had to, in ways that you've had to cut things out of your life that have been difficult for you to do, but have yielded good outcomes. I think it's important for other people to see our vulnerabilities as well as our triumphs. Vulnerability gives people the opportunity to understand us and to sympathize for us, to have compassion, and that yields a beautiful, loving relationship. Thank you so much for joining me in this Bible study. I'm looking forward to talking with you tomorrow, live at noon. I also want to encourage you, please like my Facebook if you're on Facebook. And if you're on YouTube, there's a little button down here in the bottom right corner that you can click to subscribe to my channel so that we can stay in contact with one another. And until I see you again tomorrow, live at noon, I want to tell you that I truly love you. And I hope you choose to love yourself. It is the only love that we have any control over in this world. And now I invite you to join me as we go about the rest of our day, helping others be free from the traps that they're ensnared in, getting rid of the traps in our own lives, and loving our neighbors the same way. Thank you.